Hi everyone, I'm Anthony O'Flynn. Happy 4th of July for everyone in the USA, 5th of July here in Australia. And significantly, we are watching the real-time collapse of the American empire. It's been a colossal empire and extremely powerful military, economically, socially, and now we're seeing its wane. Consumer sentiment's at an all-time low. All the metrics we're seeing coming out of the USA indicate that, as some commentators claim, we are actually at the beginning of a hyper-inflationary depression. To clarify that, hyperinflation is basically approximately 50% inflation per month. So from that parameter, we're not actually there yet, obviously, but once that occurs, even for 1 month, then that's the absolute death of that currency. And we only need to look at countries such as Zimbabwe and Venezuela to see the destruction of the currency, the purchasing power that happens to a currency once it becomes debased through the printing press, through borrowing money, printing money, everything that we're seeing here occurring in America. And significantly, this will impact on the rest of the world. And here in Australia today, we just had 50 basis points increase in the official cash rate. That's obviously going to hit all people with mortgage, increased payments there. But significantly, what's occurring in the US is, at least from an astrological point of view, due to the Pluto return, the Pluto transit that is affecting the entire nation. And we're really just in the beginning of seeing where this Pluto transit is going to take the collective over there. And really, it's going to be an incredible transformation, deconstruction, reinventing of that populace, of that nation. We're seeing more counties decertify the election. There's talk by some people claiming that a revolution is starting to brew in America. Personally, I don't know about that, but what I can say is if the midterm elections coming up are not valid, are not considered valid by the population, then the seeds are planting for increased turmoil, division, chaos, and all kinds of basic distrust of the political system, failing of the institutions, which again is all a reflection of this final degrees of Capricorn in Pluto before it makes its first transit into Aquarius next year in 2023. So really, the US is setting the stage for the rest of the planet, because once the dollar hyperinflates or basically is debased to a certain point, it will mean that it will lose its status as a reserve currency, and this will create all kinds of geopolitical problems around the planet. And at the same time, we're seeing the rise of the Chinese empire, the rise of China. So this is something that's going to play out across the decade. It won't be just one event or just a short-term thing. It is going to be quite a profound influence on everyone as we see the death of the dollar and the death also of the petrodollar. So where this goes, it's basically setting the scene for an accelerated evolution and an accelerated chaos. And as we're seeing here in America as well, Australia as well, because the net has been cast, and the net was cast a long time ago in terms of the debt bubble that's been created. A lot of the rhetoric you're seeing on social media is that people never should have borrowed that money in the first place, that people were very unwise not to plan for interest rate rises. While all that's true, it's not very helpful for people who are now faced with the fact that property prices are going down. There's some expectation that property prices will go down 15% by the end of next year. In some places, it's even considered in Australia to go down more than that. But unfortunately, property prices and the property bubble in Australia is something of a religion here, and people just don't think it can happen. And yet, when you look at the experience of Japan in the 90s, is year on year negative growth, which is an interesting term in the housing market. And also, if you look at the devastation of the housing market in Ireland in the GFC, people in Australia don't think it can happen here. So you can never basically criticise someone for being unwise, for being unaware, or for being ignorant. But that doesn't mean that people are going to experience the effects of being unwise or greedy or foolish in terms of basically borrowing money that they can't actually pay back. And that's where things are going to go in Australia. In my view, it's going to get very bitter here in the next few years. And it really is a lot to do with the property bubble and the attitude to debt basically in this country. So this is the illusion that we have here in Australia that debt is wealth. And it's going to be a very painful lesson for a lot of people to realise that living within your means is not something that is considered to be foolish or kind of conservative. If you have a certain amount of money per month coming in per year, then that's the amount of money that you have to live with. It's as simple as that. And borrowing money is basically spending money that you haven't even earned yet. So at a metaphysical level, we can see now that the evolution is becoming compressed. And I actually wrote a chapter on this in my book, Paradigm Shift, The Global Awakening of Humanity, 2020 to 2040. Chapter titled Evolution is Coming for You. And now, as I see it, with the events that are unfolding, particularly at an economic level, that the pace of evolution is now accelerating for the collective in terms of what lessons are needed to move through this paradigm shift and what wisdom needs to be accumulated and what needs to be embodied. So this means that many of the lessons that the collective has chosen to come to experience are around the material plane, consumerism, material goods, greed, and a lot of these sort of themes, which I'll speak about more in more depth. But the reality is now is that things are actually becoming compressed, and this will continue across the decade. And many would say, oh, with the 2020, with the pandemic and everything's over. I know this is only just beginning. The whole paradigm is going to shift, and we are only at the very beginning stages of this. The pandemic was really just a catalyst to start to put people in the zone of actually starting to take their evolution seriously. So this catalyst of the pandemic was basically just like the whistle, in essence, of a sporting match blowing to start the game is actually beginning. Okay, in reality, the game is being played out for quite some time, but this is when things are starting to get serious. And on that note, also, people are now starting to see the repercussions and the fallout from trusting the government, from listening to the mainstream media, from listening to these politicians that are pathological liars, the medical mafia, the unelected bureaucrats, the transnational organisations, all of these people who have collaborated consciously and in part unconsciously to produce this kind of tyranny that we've seen since 2020. It's been here for a long time, but now it's starting to become more apparent, at least to more people. And the consequences of actually listening to these talking heads, these figures, these so-called experts, and the fallout from this and the consequences that many people are starting to realise is that they have been tricked, they have been fooled, they have been manipulated, they have been coerced into taking various so-called health products that are anything but healthy and are anything but safe and are anything but effective. So this again is just at the beginning of this journey into increased awareness, and ultimately at one level or another, every person who has associated themselves with this is going to become painfully aware of this process of awakening, at least at this level, at least in this capacity. So when we talk about people waking up, well, perhaps people will live in denial even up to the moment that they pass, but I believe the majority of people will actually come to the conclusion that everything is not right, everything is not legitimate with this so-called health measures that have been enforced on many people here. And just the fact that I can't even talk about this and name the terms, the companies, the products, the people involved, it shows already what kind of censorship we're already living under, that free speech is not free on many digital platforms today. So really we can see that there is this ongoing turmoil in the collective. The recently elected Prime Minister here in Australia has just sought fit to actually go to Ukraine and pledge $100 million to Ukraine of taxpayer money. And ultimately, that's not his money. And they have a responsibility, the government, to spend this money wisely, and yet at the same time, there's people who are homeless in Sydney who've evacuated due to the floods, and it's just basically Scotty from Marketing 2.0. Scotty went to Hawaii, and Tones has gone to the Ukraine for some virtue signalling and to please his globalist mates. And it's just absolutely appalling. It really is, that there's so many Australian people who are suffering with the housing crisis, can't find anywhere to live, living in their cars, temporary accommodation, who are really struggling to make ends meet with the ongoing rising of living expenses, increased inflation, which is way above the reported figures, and also the interest rate today of another 50 basis points. And it was quite interesting to see the overall conversation around this when the last interest rate was passed on 50 basis points, of how close people are living and how little latitude there is for these interest rate rises to make ends meet. And it's a real shame that the life in Australia has come to this, that basically we now can't even be guaranteed of a roof over our head, that we can make the mortgage payments, that we can make ends meet. And Australia used to be one of the highest standard of living in the world. And I don't think we can even claim to be anywhere near that today. It really did. It was at one point, it was referred to as a lucky country, and it was an egalitarian society, much more than what it is today, where everyone was basically had the opportunity to have a home. And even going back not that long ago, it was quite enough money coming into a household for just one person in the household to work, and the other person to maintain the house and so on. There wasn't the same financial pressure. And that's not the world we're living in today, not in Australia. So the good news is that basically the subtle energy is actually ramping up in the last few days. It's dropped off today, but there has been quite a powerful activation in the upper chakra, Sahasrara, the crown chakra, and that's been ongoing for the last couple of days. It hasn't been so strong at all today, but basically there is this polarity occurring, that basically this awakening is going on. The subtle reality is changing. People are starting to connect with higher states of consciousness. That's why there is the turmoil, because people are starting to question the status quo, consensus reality, the mainstream media, the actions of the government, the actions of the unelected bureaucrats, and more people are seeking to hold these people accountable and start to basically find their voice and speak out against this tyranny, this complete lack of representation in federal state government. But what concerns me the most is that even in spite of these conversations happening in the mainstream media around the various economic pressures we're experiencing, how few people are actually preparing for what is only going to intensify here in Australia, that how few people are taking action, that people seem to think that their house won't go down in price, that their property won't go down in price. Well, just as an anecdote story, one of my neighbours is selling their house, and they put the price down, had on the market for, I don't know, approximately 3 weeks, I'm not exactly sure, maybe 4, I'm not exactly sure. They put it down $100,000 already in just a few weeks. So if that's a sign of things to come, then people just cannot see, they don't study history, they don't watch what's really happening, they don't access alternative information, and they don't tend to see that things can change. And we're on a different trajectory now. The days of record property, they've already finished. I've been talking to people in the real estate industry just recently, and it is over. The boom is over, in my view. This is not financial advice. This is just the opinion that I've formed in the research and the conversations that I've been having recently. What bothers me even more about what I see occurring is so few people starting to actually prepare genuinely, spiritually, for the times that we are actually entering now and have been in for quite some time. And this is the most important thing. It is the single most important thing of all, is that we must attune ourselves to the cosmic timetable, and we must attune ourselves to the cosmic awakening that's occurring on this planet. And if we don't, we're simply not going to be able to integrate the superior waves of energy that are coming now, that we're able to accumulate and experience and embody. And this is really something that should be at the top of our list, to make peace with God, to get right with God, and to put the spiritual dimension in our lives front and center. It's not an afterthought. It's not a hobby. It's not a kind of pastime. It's not an interest. It's the ultimate reason why we have incarnated, why we've taken a physical body, and why we are here on this planet, is to experience this colossal cosmic game, the colossal paradigm shift that is occurring, that we're living through in real time. So this spiritual dimension, it is really important to start to make efforts now and integrate these waves of energy. Otherwise, it will become increasingly more difficult as the timelines start to separate. Really, that's everything for now, but stay tuned. I've got plenty of topics I want to talk about, and plenty of different themes that will become relevant and can be integrated as we move through this, because people who are thinking things are going back to normal as the so-called pandemic is over and things are starting to return to normal, we are just now experiencing the beginning of a whole new wave of challenges. And in the challenge, obviously, is that opportunity for radical, genuine transformation. Put more information on the retreat, Navigating the Shift retreat, that I am planning for October. More details about that to come soon. Take care, stay strong. We live in epic times.